We'll continue discussing musical modernism by focusing on the Second Viennese School. Recall that the First Viennese School was considered to be Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven, whose compositional styles defined the aspects of mature classicism and also set the stage for the early Romantic era. Likewise, the Second Viennese School will define at least some aspects of musical modernism, particularly in Germany and Austria, and will set the stage for a certain school of thought of modern music throughout the 20th century. It's important to note that some of the aspects that we'll discuss are simply one type of musical vocabulary that was used during the course of the 20th century. The leader of this school was Arnold Schoenberg. He's mostly self-taught, and he received his first teaching post in Berlin through the help of Richard Strauss. He returns to Vienna in 1904 to teach. There he was supported by Mahler, but often encountered resistance from critics and audiences. I love this picture of Schoenberg on the left of him playing ping pong. He eventually moved to California, of all places. He lived right down the street from Igor Stravinsky, whom we'll look at in the next presentation. He had fled Europe because he was of Jewish descent, and this put him at great risk from the Nazis, and he, like many other Jews, fled Europe. Schoenberg was also a skilled painter. He was friends with Kandinsky, whose work we saw in the last presentation. He developed ties to the visual arts communities of Germany and Eastern Europe. He is born Jewish, converts to Lutheranism, likely in part to avoid issues with the Nazis, and converts to Judaism again when he moves to France in 1933. Schoenberg's tonal language changes throughout his life, though it is guided by a style known as developing variations. He takes basic motives, sometimes called a Grundgestalt, or underlying form, and continually transforms them throughout the work. Here he's looking in some ways at Wagner, but particularly Brahms. He's looking at how Brahms will take a musical motive and develop it again and again and again, changing it throughout the course of a work. He's also particularly interested in Bach. He begins writing tonal works. These are written in a post-Wagnerian, almost Straussian tonality, usually with gigantic ensembles. Some of these famous works include Verklärte Nacht, or Transfigured Night, Gurrelieder, and Pelleas und Melisande. He slowly moves to atonality, believing that extreme dissonances and the abandonment of functional key schemes in modern music had weakened tonality. Schoenberg suggests the emancipation of dissonance. He abandons traditional harmonic forms and functions. One of the most well-known of these early atonal works is Pierrot Lunaire, or Moonstruck Pierrot. So this is based on the symbolist poetry of the poet Albert Girard. Here is one instance of it. This is the opening poem of Pierrot Lunaire. The wine we drink through the eyes pours down at night from the moon in waves, and a flash flood inundated the silent horizon. Cravings, gruesome sweet, swim through the floods without number. The wine we drink through our eyes pours down at night from the moon in the waves. The poet, driven by devotion, intoxicated by holy potions, turns skyward, ecstatic and staggering, sucks and slurps it, the wine we drink through our eyes. You can see again that this poetry is not only non-representational, it's slightly creepy. And the music is slightly creepy as well. Uh, it references this character, Pierrot. Pierrot is in many ways the quintessential sad clown. He is a clown figure from the Commedia dell'arte tradition. And he goes through a number of misadventures and unfortunate circumstances in this series of poems. The other thing that makes this piece slightly unnerving is that it employs a technique called Sprechstimme, or speak singing, or speak voice. Here, the singer does not sing specific pitches, but rather gestures of pitches and approximates them in a sort of vocal contour. You'll see what I mean as we listen to an excerpt of this first movement of Pierrot Lunaire.
Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt, gießt nachts der Mond in Wogen nieder. Und eine Springflut überschwemmt den stillen Horizont. Gelüste, schauerlich und süß, durchschwimmen ohne Zahl die Fluten. Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt, gießt nachts der Mond in Wogen nieder.
One of the salient aspects of this early atonal style is the repetition of pitches. It might not seem like it at first, but if you go back and listen, you'll hear the same opening gesture occur twice at the same pitch level. This will become rarer in Schoenberg's later style, when he adopts a series of musical vocabulary called serialism. This is because he's dissatisfied with the free atonal works. For him, they lack structure, a structure that would be equivalent to the functional tonality that he used to use. So Schoenberg gradually developed what he called method of composition with 12 tones related only to one another. This is now known as serialism. The idea here is that there is a series of 12 tones that don't relate to a harmonic system. Rather, they only relate through their patterns to themselves. Here we see that there is a tone row consisting of 12 chromatic pitches that is manipulated throughout the course of a piece. The systematic use of the row allowed for Schoenberg to substitute for the rigors of the tonal system, replaced by the almost mathematical rigors of serialism. This chart is what is called a matrix. Take a look at the top row of pitches, which is labeled on the left P0, or prime 0. Here you see B, A sharp D, D sharp G, F sharp, G sharp E, F, C, C sharp A. This is a quintessential serial row. You might actually notice that every 3 pitches is made up of the same sort of motive. It includes a folded minor second, minor third, and major third in it. Look at those 3 first pitches. B and A sharp is the minor second, A sharp to D is a respelled major third, and B to D is a minor third. If you look at each of the following 3 pitches, you'll see that they also have that same group of intervals in it. This is known in the nomenclature of 20th century theory as a 014 trichord, a 014 trichord. That means if you start at 0 and then move up a half step and then move up a minor third, that's sort of the collapsed down version. But let's leave aside that it sounds more mathematical than it needs to. The important thing to remember here is that Schoenberg is just interested in motives. He's interested in taking an idea and developing it out. And this becomes a way that he can do that. So if you look at P0 and you run it across, you see B, A sharp D, etc., etc. The way that a matrix is created is then you have the inversion of that, which runs down vertically. So the prime form runs horizontally across the top. The inversion runs vertically down the side. So what we'll do is we'll take that starting pitch, and if we went down an interval, we'll go up an interval. So first it went down from B to A sharp, down a half step, so we'll go up a half step, B to C. A sharp went up essentially a major third to D, so we'll go down a major third from C to G sharp. This is carried all the way down the side. And then at this point, we just transpose the prime form up based on where we start on the left-hand side. So if you find P1, you'll notice that everything is a half step up from P0. And then if you find P2, everything is a half step up from P1. The only thing that a matrix allows us to do is just to see all the available rows. We can see all the prime form rows running left to right, and we can see all the inversions running from top to bottom. We can also see the retrogrades of these rows running from right to left, and the retrograde inversions running from bottom to top. It's actually more helpful to think of this like a block, like a building block. Or if you're a fan of the game Tetris, think of it like that, because that's what it's most similar to. What we're really doing here is we're taking building blocks that, are sort of falling down from our consciousness, and we're turning them around, we're spinning them around and connecting them together in interesting ways. Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern will have vastly different styles of using this method. So it's really a form of vocabulary. It's a technique. It's not the only style of modern music. It's just one way to organize pitches that alleviates a sense of tonality. Let's see how Schoenberg deals with this. In one of his string quartets that uses serialism, we'll actually find that the textures are very reminiscent of a classical string quartet. We have melody plus accompaniment. We'll actually hear the row plainly stated. It's actually sort of hummable. It goes like this. Bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-dum, ba, ya-dum, ba-bum. It's kind of a weird little tune, but you could go down the street humming it. You might have some people look at you funny, but it's possible. Throughout this, the accompaniment is taken from the row itself. So it's not a chord, it's just using that same shape. Again, it's like playing Tetris. You have the melody, and the accompaniment is made up of little blocks from that melody. Think about what Kandinsky was doing with that painting that we saw of his. It was all based on lines that were straight or curved. That's all that serialism is it's taking shapes and breaking them down and relating them mostly to each other and not to predetermined systems. Schoenberg had many students, but two became particularly devout followers of his style. One was Alban Berg, and the other was Anton Webern. Berg began studying with Schoenberg in 1904 and began work on his first published piece, the Piano Sonata in B minor, in 1908 and completed it in 1911. Berg's music frequently alludes to tonality. For instance, he quotes the Bach chorale Es ist genug, that is, it is enough, in his violin concerto. And even his tone rows are more tonal in their sound. The tone row for the violin concerto actually implies the tonic and dominant of G minor. He, though, is still interested in working out ideas. His opera Wozzeck of 1925 is likely the most successful modernist opera. His lyric suite for string quartet and the violin concerto are also popular works of his. And while Wozzeck is not serial, it is still highly structured. Each scene is essentially an invention on a concept, either a pitch or a rhythm. For instance, the first scene references a Baroque suite, with a prelude, a pavane, a cadenza, a gigue, a gavotte, and an aria. Berg seems particularly interested in taking these new styles and fusing them with old styles, perhaps more so than the other composers in the Second Viennese School. In some ways, you can think of Schoenberg as the most classical of these modernist composers. As you just saw, he even states that he feels that he has learned from Mozart in his technique. You could then categorize Berg as perhaps the most romantic of the Second Viennese School, with the most overt romanticism in terms of gestures as well as in his harmonic structures. It leaves us then to move on to Anton Webern, who is in many ways the most Baroque of these composers, the most reverential to Bach. Anton Webern also began studying with Schoenberg in 1904. At the time, he was also studying musicology at the University of Vienna, where he earned his PhD. His musicological background influenced his composition deeply. His lecture series, The Path to New Music, suggested that serialism is the inevitable next step on the evolutionary path of music. This is a very Germanic idea. Remember that it's only in the late 19th century in the German-speaking lands that we have musicology develop. So it is inherently going to look at past composers of German heritage the most favorably, ones like Beethoven and Bach. So it makes sense that within that lineage, the Second Viennese School will see themselves as the next quote-unquote evolutionary step. However, it's important to remember that ultimately, this is just one aspect of vocabulary in the 20th and 21st centuries, and that there are many other types of music that we'll see going forward. Webern's music is particularly fascinating because it is so intensely concentrated. His compositions are often brief, maximizing the potential of the row while minimizing both the time that it takes to state his idea, as well as any tonal implications in stating it. Some of his works are less than a minute long, and in fact his symphony and some of his concertos are shorter than the movements, the individual movements of some of the Romantic symphonies. So we see that the forms are tightly compressed. Here is an example philosophically of what Webern is getting at. This is a magic square that he referenced. It reads, Sator arepo tenet opera rotas. It translates loosely as the sower controls the seed controls the sower. Here, the idea is the composer controls the idea as much as the idea is controlling the composer. There is a unity there. And in fact, we see that the magic square demonstrates that tight unity, that symmetry, because it reads the same way backwards and forwards, upside down and side to side. In fact, it looks a lot like that 12-tone matrix that we were just looking at when we started looking at serialism. So it's this tight symmetry that Webern is going to love in his music. This motivic unity that we saw so often in Bach and in Brahms. Here is an excerpt from the second movement of his symphony, Opus 21. Take a look at the row which you may see numbered in the clarinet line in the uppermost system, the uppermost line. It reads F, A flat, G, F sharp, B flat, A, E flat, E, C, C sharp, D, B. Now, if you imagine running from the front to the middle and from the back to the middle, you'll see that it's actually symmetrical. It is a mirrored form. So we have F, A flat, G at the beginning, and if we read it from the back, it reads B, D, C sharp. Both sides go up a minor third and then down a minor second. And those patterns proceed until we get to the middle that is separated by a tritone. Now, take a look at the accompaniment. That accompaniment reads B, D, C sharp, C, E, E flat, A, B flat, F sharp, G, G sharp, F. In fact, that's just the inversion of the opening row. And or rather the retrograde, the reading of backwards of that opening row. He has so tightly constructed the row that if it reads backwards from itself, there are no extraneous pitches. This is what's called hexachordal combinatoriality. That if we take the first hexachord of the row, that is the first 6 notes, it can be combined with other hexachords of other rows and complete what is known as the aggregate, all 12 pitches. The important thing to take away from here is not necessarily those mathematical aspects, but the strange sort of other world that Webern creates just through using the shapes that make up this row. You'll hear, if you take a listen and if you give it a chance, a different sort of music, a music that is based on patterns and ideas, much like the images of Kandinsky were based on lines, curved and straight. How we're almost playing with Tetris-like shapes, moving them around and combining them together to make, for the individual composer, what is the most aesthetically or philosophically pleasing work that they can make.